Couple housekeeping items before we jump on in. This webinar will be recorded. We do have a small group this afternoon. It'll have more of a little bit of a workshop, you feel, where folks can feel free, take yourself off mute, ask questions, and so on, as we'll go through a relatively informal presentation. And if you feel comfortable, feel free to change your Zoom name and put your gender pronouns in the Zoom name. And we can kick off and get started about best practices for virtual events. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia LeWarn, our fearless leader in this space. So Olivia, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandra. Can everyone see my screen? Ooh, wrong button. Yikes. I'm supposed to be teaching you all how to do this, and here we are. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Olivia LeWarn. I am the engagement coordinator for the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, and I use they, them pronouns. So back in September, the coalition held our 8th annual forum and our first annual virtual forum. Hopefully last, although I cannot say that I have a crystal ball. But we got some really great feedback from the attendees, and on the staff side, it went particularly smooth. So we're here now to share all of the information that we gleaned through trial and error with you all, so you don't have to have the same process. So just a quick overview of the forum itself. This year's forum had over 360 attendees, which is the most that we've ever had in the forum. Shout out to not having to travel. We had 35 sessions spread over the course of 4 days, and we wrangled over 100 individual presenters to present their work in all of our sessions. So there was a lot going on top of it being in a virtual platform. And that being said, we got a lot of really fantastic feedback from people, especially since this was still pretty early on in virtual events for the pandemic, because a lot of events that were planned for like those earlier months were just flat out canceled or like postponed. This like late summer, early fall was really when we were seeing a lot of virtual events first occurring. So it seems as though people were really appreciative. People still like the virtual events, although you can't have a dance party like you would an in-person event, but the hunger is still there. So it's definitely still worthwhile doing. So we as a group had made the call to go virtual mid-April, but our planning process for all of our forums starts like early March. So we had to pivot, and we had to pivot fast. So prior to making the call to go virtual, like all of our sessions had been selected. We were in the process of confirming speakers. So the first things that we did to make the switch to virtual was usually our forums are over the span of 2 days, and we spread it out to 4 to allow for the virtual format. And then we also spent the first couple of sessions after we had switched to going virtual about thinking of how to incorporate interactive elements into the virtual format. Both in the sessions that we provide and then in the like breakout sessions themselves. And then we also had to make the call if we wanted to have primarily live or primarily pre-recorded content. So we were lucky with the folks who are on our forum planning committee that a lot of them were involved in River Rally. So some were on the planning side of River Rally, and then some were on the presenters. So in terms of the question of live versus pre-recorded content, we found from the River Rally folks that were part of the planning process that a lot more folks attended the live sessions rather than the pre-recorded sessions. And then from people who had to record pre-recorded content to put up, they felt that it was like very uncomfortable and a little weird. So we tried to go for live sessions as much as possible, just based on attendance levels that we've heard about, and as well as what folks would be comfortable and actually presenting. So this next question that we had to figure out was like, how are we going to schedule this beast of a forum into the virtual world? So we sent out a survey to our entire membership asking what people's like preference for a daily schedule is, thinking about like how long breaks would be in between sessions, how long they want their entire day to go. So the results of the survey are up at the top. And we found out, to no surprise, we are not a bunch of early risers. Not a lot of people wanted things going on at 9 a.m. And people liked it where there was like medium amount of breaks, so they didn't want to go super long into the day. And the sweet spot for like making our attendees and the folks who took this survey happy, as well as like our own staff needs, was we aimed for the main of our, like the main bulk of our content to be from 10 to 3 every day. And then just due to the number of sessions that we had and what we had to provide, there were other sessions that fell out of those, I guess, parameters, but they were more of like the specialized sessions. So we had state-based sessions for each of the 4 basin states. Those for the most part fell out of that 10 to 3 because there was only a handful of people who were attending. And then we also had field trips like at 9 o'clock and then after 3, because those were like more fun. You could kind of just like turn off your brain either in the morning or at night. So it wasn't as like thought intensive as like the main bulk of the content, when we knew that it would best serve our attendees to be tuning in. So then concurrently, like we did all the normal planning things that like an event of this would take. So our planning committee was working at the layout of the event, figuring out when to put in breaks, following that survey that we had sent out, wrangling the speakers, figuring out what we're doing. The biggest thing that was added onto our planning stage was making all of the adaptations to virtual. So you can see at the top of like this picture thing here, that is a screenshot of our Sketch. It was a program app that had like a calendar interface. So we could put all of like the Zoom information, the description information. This also allowed people to like rate and give feedback to specific sessions that they saw. We really liked using Sketch because you could also send, like when you registered for your specific sessions, you could have Sketch send you a calendar invite, so you didn't have to manually put them in, which was really nice. We were at the beginning a little worried that it would take some like teeth pulling to get people to use Sketch, just because every time you add a step to something, you worry that there's going to be drop off. We found that most of our members were like more than happy to use Sketch. It did not take a ton of prodding for them to go in and create their schedules, even like before we had really fleshed it out and we just put it out to them. Like people were already like making their profiles and working with it. But this was like really helpful as a component of keeping ourselves organized. We also then held coordinating calls with all of our session speakers, which we had done in years past. But again, we had to tweak it for this virtual life. So we developed a Zoom best practices guide for our presenters that included things like how can you get like good lighting? You want the lighting to face you. You want to be looking into your computer like camera rather than like down at your hands while you're presenting. Zoom and some other like platforms just don't like certain patterns of clothing. So just keeping all of those in mind for presenters. And then also just going over tips based on like the space that we're in. So for example, like telling speakers that it is not super productive to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves via Zoom. It can be done in the chat, and like we only have so much time together. So while we were doing the preparing for presenters, we were also preparing our staff for their Zoom roles at the same time. So the presenters, like I said, we were holding our coordinating meetings. We were holding them all over Zoom. And that was both so we could like see each other, which is very nice, but also we could like do a preliminary check of their audio visual. So were there people when we had the coordinating call, was their like audio really messed up? Were they like hunched in a corner in a dark like dungeon? Then we could tell them like in June that they needed to find a different place to be, or like buy a lamp or something. And then at the end of the summer, like about 2 weeks before the actual forum, we got all of the presenters together for like 2 big calls. It was the same call just twice, so we could reach people with different schedules. So the coordinating meetings were just with each individual like panel, so like groups of 3 or 4 people. The final call was with everyone. And it was to go over that best practices document that we had sent out, because sometimes you just send out a Word document and nobody reads it. So it was a little story time where we reiterated all the most important things and also answering a bunch of last minute questions that folks may have not thought of when we were having these coordinating calls in the early summer, but as they were like preparing for their presentation or like becoming more acquainted with virtual platforms, they would have questions for. So we were handling all the presenters, and at the same time, we were also trying to prepare our staff. So we're a staff of 4, and then we have an event coordinator. So there were 5 of us, and we were manning all of the rooms, and we were trying to keep everything organized. So in order to do that, you have to be like Zoom professionals. So we gave all of our staff that were going to be hosting meetings resources on how to use Zoom. and all of like the Zoom, I guess, like add-ons that we needed. So were they comfortable setting up breakout rooms? Did they know how to spotlight? Could they easily access a poll? Like, did they remember to mute everyone upon entry so you don't have like weird chatter and dog barking in the background at the beginning of a session? And then since I was the main person who was holding all the coordinating calls with the presenters, I also was keeping a list of all the Zoom features needed. So, oh, the session about outdoor recreation, they want 2 breakout rooms at this time for this amount of people for this much time. Because since I was the person who had most of this information, I wanted to make it as easy as possible. So like if Rita was hosting 3 sessions in a day, she could like just very easily sign into our shared Google Doc, which I'll show in a second, and just be like, okay, this is what I have to think about. So it is hard because, you know, everything is being done virtually. So I can't just like kind of mosey over to someone's desk and be like, hey, are you ready to do this? Or like just a quick reminder. So we like lived and breathed by this very scary looking Google spreadsheet. And this is just like a screenshot of it, but it had almost every piece of information you could possibly want for a specific session. Like, what time is it? What are we calling it? Who's the staff that's assigned to taking care of it? What's the Zoom link? And then the most important thing that I was kind of talking about here was like the special features. So are things having to be spotlit? Are there breakout rooms? Are you toggling the chat on and off depending on like the profile level of the speaker? And things like that. So as much as we could do beforehand is what we like tried to do. So all of our polls were preset. Everything was set to record automatically. If we knew that there was going to be a specific like time for a breakout room, you can do that beforehand in Zoom as well. Just so like once you were actually hosting and the session was happening, you didn't have to worry about as much. As well as like this system that like everyone, all the staff members knew their meetings requirements was really important. What I tried to do, because like I was the one who was interfacing with the speakers the most, if there was a session that had like a lot of things going on, like they wanted breakout rooms and polls and this, that, and the other, I tried to take those because I was more familiar with what they were asking for. And then the staff members that weren't as involved in the planning phase, they could take some of the easier sessions where it's just like sharing their screens and letting folks in. And I can see that there are things happening in the chat. So let me pause. Oh yes, Sandra will share that with everyone. Okay, moving forward. So then the event has happened. I stopped having heart palpitations for 4 weeks on end because it's happening now. So there are a couple of things that we did like in the event itself that we thought was really good. So if you're using Zoom, there's the option for it's like meeting or webinar mode. We chose to go with the meeting mode just because we do want this to we wanted it to be interactive. And this way, if you're in like the meeting mode, you can take yourself off mute. If you want to ask questions, you can just see more people. I don't really like just talking to a blank screen. I like to see people occasionally nodding or shaking their heads depending on what I say. So we went with this, but then to make sure that it was like clear who the presenters were, Rita did a really great job and she put together this virtual background. So you can see that there's like 4 of us with green backgrounds. And that's when you're like looking out into a sea of little boxes, it was easier to figure out who was a presenter. Now, not everybody's computer can support having a virtual background just based on like the age and like its computer processing. But for those who did, it was really nice. And also you could just see like sometimes the presenters had left it on even if they were in a different session. So you're just like, oh yes, I remember you and I wanted to ask you a question from a day and a half ago. Like I can DM you. Like Sandra had asked for at the beginning of this presentation, we also in like a nod to equity and inclusion, asked folks to introduce their gender pronouns in their Zoom names. That's great for like inclusivity. And also like, since a lot of people were asking their questions in the chat, I couldn't be like, I was just kind of guessing if Sandra had put in a question, I'd be like, Sandra has a question and she was wondering this. I was really just taking a stab in the dark if I didn't know the person's pronouns, but since they were in their like Zoom name in the chat, it also came up. So that was really nice. For all of our sessions, we had our speakers join 15 minutes early so we could just troubleshoot like any last second tech issues. It's like somebody's microphone literally broke within that like 15-minute waiting period, and he had enough time to like run and scramble and get a new microphone. And also it was nice for the presenters to kind of just like shake themselves off a little bit, like do a jumping jack or two before their presentation and kind of just get grounded in the space rather than like, all right, it's 2 o'clock, let's get rolling. And then the last thing that we did like during the actual event and that we wanted like our hosts to know is if there were any polls or anything in the session, like reading the polls aloud, either like the actual poll and as well as the results. If you don't have great internet connectivity, that's like one of the first things that Zoom will get rid of is like, you don't get to see polls. So if you still want people to be able to participate, they can like put their answers in the chat or they at least know what's going on when the results are read, rather than kind of just zoning out for a couple minutes because the polls don't work for them. So also during the event, we had housekeeping notes at the top of every single session. It was pretty quick. It was just the host like ran through these couple of bullet points. But because it was virtual, there were people who wanted to show up for just a single session. So we had to reiterate like the housekeeping at the top of every single session, just so the one person who came for that one session knows that their little face will be recorded and who to contact if there are technical issues. We had gone back and forth. It's like, do we want to do it every time? In the end, we thought that it was for the best and it really didn't take up that much time to do so. So fully leaning into our new virtual world. So in years past, it was people could do things on PowerPoint. They could get us their presentations kind of whenever they wanted, up to and including giving us a flash drive an hour before their presentation, being like, I did it last night. None of that. We used everything on Google Slides. So like folks who are working in different organizations could all work at Google Slides like at the same time. We also then could provide them a template for their session. So it included like links that we needed folks to have access to, hashtags that we were using for promotion at certain parts. We could put all of our like sponsors past a certain level, like their logos, as we had promised in our sponsorship ranges. And also like I could obsessively like kind of watch the sessions and be like, ooh, like they haven't done they're not doing their PowerPoint. I should probably send them an email. What are you up to, folks? So that was really nice. And then the Google Slides, our staff members could also look at the slideshow before they went to present. So if there was a part that said like, there's a poll here, there's a poll here, in the slide deck, the hosts were like ready and locked and loaded because they knew what was gonna come at them. Another beautiful part about Google Slides is that you can have some like interactive slides depending on how you wanna share your screen. So for some of the sessions that were more like workshop focused, we would share the link to the Google Slides and like make it editable so anyone with the link could edit it. And then we had these like interactive things. So this was taken from an old presentation where we had like done a breakout room and they were talking to each other, and then they could like drag these beautiful little clouds to like either side of the spectrum to share their thoughts. We also had some slides that were really useful in like talking about breakout groups. Like half of the time of a breakout group is like then spent sharing like what did you talk about in that breakout group, and not everybody gets to share, but we got to use these slides where like the groups could go in and while they were talking to each other, they could just like jot their thoughts down on these like quote unquote sticky notes. So then some people could still take themselves off mute at the like share out portion, but everyone's thoughts were still recorded here. It is a little bit of a lift if you want to use a lot of virtual or interactive slides, and you also don't want people like messing with your actual slide content, and like there are some things that you want them to edit and there are some things you don't. The best way that I could find is you like make your presentation and then you take a screenshot of each slide that you don't want them touching, and then you just put that screenshot into the slide so they can't touch anything. It's like it's just what the background of the slide is, and then the things that you like do want them to interact with, they can still move it along. There are a lot of like really good resources online for like teacher interactive stuff, because the teachers are trying to get their kids to care about their education just a little bit. So a lot of the resources that I found, a lot of these were from the National Wildlife Federation, but also when I was trying to figure out how to lock my slides, I found myself on like a teacher blog being like, my kids keep moving my maps. I'm like, I don't want that at all. So that was Google Slides. Then there's still also a ton of things happening behind the scenes. So some of these things Rita can touch on a little bit more in her portion, but just because you're not in person doesn't mean that you can't advertise and promote. So we still had a hashtag for the forum. Also, just like everyone's internet connectivity is a mixed bag at all times. So if there was only one staff member who was the host, there was no other staff on the call, I would just ask like the presenters, I was like, which one of you has the best internet right now? And I'm gonna make you a co-host, because if I fall off, I do not want this presentation to end. So you are going to act as my co-host if I fall off the ship for a little bit. We did keep it, like I said, we used those Google Slides. It was one PowerPoint presentation per session. Our host or staff member was the one who was sharing their screen, just because the less amount of things that we could put in the hands of the presenters other than the presentation is what we wanted to do. So there wasn't the issue of like, I don't know how to share my screen or it's not working. Like our staff took care of that. Muting all of your participants upon entry is something that's like really obvious, and I didn't do for the first half day. I was just like, I'm just gonna go and mute everyone individually. That could be really fun. It's not. And that's something that you can set up like ahead of time on Zoom or whatever platform that you're using. Two things that we thought were like really important that like you would do in a normal like in-person event, but you have to schedule now because we're all in the comfort of our own homes, is we had a staff debrief at the end of every single day to like go over any technical issues that anybody in the sessions found. So it's like this person for whatever reason like couldn't get into Zoom and this is how I fixed it. So we could figure out what things needed to be troubleshooted and fixed for like upcoming days, or if someone ran into the same problem, they know how to fix it if they haven't seen it before. And also just like notable quotes that we could use for like promotion after the forum, like in our blogs and things like that, because we aren't all in all the same sessions. So it was even something as easy as like, we're 45 minutes into this session because we're gonna go through the recordings anyway. You can like pick out that like 1 or 2 liners. So the staff debrief was really good. And then also you got to do the countdown where you're like, well, you're a day in, like you only got 3 days left, we can do it. So it's good to keep morale high. And then we had gone kind of back and forth, like, do we want to be emailing people every single day with their Zoom links? You know, they have Sketch, but we're trying to accommodate, I guess, the lowest common denominator of people who did not want to use Sketch. So Sandra at the beginning of every single day sent out an email with like the day's Zoom links. People really liked that from our feedback. I was like, I don't know, are you guys going to get mad that we're emailing you so much? But no, they liked that it was going to like straight to their inbox and they didn't have to think about it. They just had to wake up and there was an email from Sandra being like, I hope you're excited for another great day. So like I had kind of previously alluded to, all of our sessions were recorded and posted to our YouTube channel within the following week. And when there are breakout rooms, a hot tip is you should pause the recording, because there was a session that I had to edit out 15 minutes of someone just like eating during the breakout session because nothing was happening. And she's like, I do not want the world to see me eating a salad, please edit it out. When there are breakout rooms, like for the recording, Zoom gives you 2 options. You can either pause the recording or stop the recording. If you stop the recording, it then breaks the recording into like 2 separate files. And it is a pain to like link them back together, especially if you don't have really good like editing software. So the pause button is your friend. And then we didn't have a ton of like editing software. So I did everything through YouTube's movie editor, which was fun. And it does not take 17 years, it does. So basically what you wanna do is you wanna be like editing on the front end. Like you wanna pause the recording when nothing's going on, you wanna restart it as soon as things are happening, because even to upload something onto YouTube, it can take upwards of like an hour for an hour-long video. So the less amount of time that you have to like play with downloading files, re-uploading them to an editing like software or even to YouTube, the more that you can like trim out on the front half is going to make your life a lot easier. And it also did take a while because my internet is not always great. So occasionally, like I was uploading a video and my internet just stopped working and I was like, no, but you can do it. Just don't tell anyone that you'll get them the entire like 4 days or however long your events is recordings within the next day. You need to let yourself have some time to breathe and also just think about all the sessions that happened and all the great times you've had. So like I had said, we like as for most people, this was like our first major virtual event. We were kind of just flying by the seat of our pants. We weren't entirely sure what we were doing. So looking back, some things that we had wished we had done, people were really missing the ability to kind of just like chat with each other and like network like you would at a normal forum. So if we could leave even like 15 minutes after sessions for people to be able to like DM each other in the chat or like take themselves off mute and have little conversations. We thought that that was really nice. There were sessions that kind of just ran over and that happened naturally. And that was something that not every session could have. Also just like a little bit more breathing room between sessions. So it was hard because we were trying to like get all the information in that we would have in a normal like year's forum, and also make it so we aren't taking up everybody's whole day, but having sessions like every half hour, but also having the presenters be there 15 minutes early. And we all know how events kind of just naturally tend to run late. There were times where I was like, I could either make a sandwich or I can go to the bathroom, and we will choose because this show is going to keep going whether I want it to or not. So just like an extra 15 minutes would have been really great for a couple of our back-to-back sessions. Also, like if you're bringing outside speakers in, like really push for like breakout room options, interactive things, even something like as simple as like, how's everyone feeling today? Like put it in the chat, can like really get people going. And it is hard because we're like all in our little houses all by ourselves now. And a lot of people do miss just like being able to share their thoughts. And also we started doing it on the last couple of days in our forum, but something that we really tried pushing was like just attendees to turn on their videos. Like I said, it's hard as a presenter to like present to a bunch of like black boxes with people's or names on them. So it is just nice to like have the attendees have their videos on. And I know like I go to sessions sometimes and my video's off, but like whenever you put on the ask and you just like ask people like, hey, it's really nice, like some people would turn it on. So that's something that we think is always worth reminding because it does make the whole atmosphere nicer. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rita because she did a lot of our outreach work and she can speak more to that. So go ahead, Rita.
Well, thank you, Olivia. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about our outreach and communications that we did for the forum. I would say some of it's a little bit different than last year, but which was in person, but some of it is just really the constant and what we like to do every year. So first, we kind of figured out who are our target audiences, who did we want to reach to come to our 8th annual Delaware River Watershed Forum. So we decided that we obviously wanted coalition members to come. We wanted schools, so colleges, universities, students. We also wanted, as I mentioned, our coalition members, but also our supporters, so people who have taken action on our action alert or have come to our coalition events in the past. So people who are supporters, but maybe not necessarily members. Also previous attendees. So we have a list of everybody who came to our previous forums that were in person. We also wanted to target our social media users who live within the Delaware River Basin, and specifically who followed us on social media or who cared about environmental issues such as water quality, environment, things like that. And then there was also outreach to sponsors, which Olivia really championed. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we reached these folks. So for our coalition members and our supporters and our previous attendees, we did a lot of different stuff. So we did paid advertising on social media. We also did regular posts on social media, starting, even a couple months out. And then as we got closer to the actual date, we would post more regularly about the forum. So we had paid advertising, but then also just the organic reach that we were reaching folks with our regular, like unpaid posts. We also did constant contact emails. So we use constant contact for our events because it has a built-in way of having an RSVP list in there, and you can also pay for your ticket in there. So I really love that about constant contact. So if you're looking for a way to set up your registration page and also email people, it's a really good way to do that, highly recommended. So we sent out a few constant contact emails. We sent out an early bird email where we had an early bird rate, and that encouraged the first round of people to register because they saw that cheaper price. I believe it was a $25 discount all the way until the end of August. And then we also, as things were kind of coming together, we sent out another constant contact email. So as soon as we knew, like for example, that we were going to focus on DEIJ, or that we were going to have field trips that, you know, took you over the Delaware or whatever, anytime that we had that new information that was coming together, we would try to include that in our constant contact emails, just to kind of keep people updated, get them excited about who our keynote speaker was, what field trips we were going to have, what sessions we were going to have. We announced our theme as well through the constant contact email. And then we ended up sending a follow-up to everybody who attended that included the presentation, the link to the presentations, a link to the recording, a blog that we had written about it, as well as a survey that we were asking our attendees to take. So really just stressing the importance here of staying in touch with your audience through the process and keeping people interested. I won't say too much about the social media purchasing, but other than even a small budget can go a long way for reaching folks on. So if you buy a Facebook ad, you could also advertise on Instagram because they are owned by the same company. So even if you have a little bit of money, our budget wasn't huge, but we were still able to reach thousands of people. And we did that by looking for people that were interested. This is our target audience, people who are interested in the coalition or water quality. Also targeted some lookalike audiences from other organizations like Sierra Club and stuff like that, of folks who might be interested. And then we also did do a lot of direct outreach. So that's really, putting together email lists and sending emails to folks, personalized emails, asking them to be involved or attend. So we did that with coalition members. We did a couple rounds of direct outreach, just sending an email to them saying, hey, either like you're a new member and we would love to engage you, or you're an existing member and we'd still love to engage you. And so really just kind of personalizing each outreach email, and then doing the same thing with schools. Olivia had a great list that they put together that was public policy departments, communication departments, environmental departments, for all of the universities, that throughout the watershed. So it's really comprehensive, and so we used that. And we had I would say a record number of students this year. I think partially because we also had a student discount, and we also this year made it very accessible to not only access the student discount, but also access if you needed a free ticket because of financial situations, we made that really easy and accessible to ask for. And we, again, included that all in our constant contact emails as well, just to make it really accessible. I think that's all I want to say about this slide. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so I just want to talk about two of the interesting things that we did on the promotional side here. So firstly, one thing that I did this year that I do every year, but I tried to make it a little bit more appealing to our member organizations to use this social media guide. But every year we put together a social media guide that's full of graphics, so similar to this graphic next to this bullet point. It has graphics for social media, as well as social media posts that can be used for Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. And it would encourage people to register. There is different messaging, different kinds of posts. And we sent that to, not only was I personally using that to promote the forum on social media, but I also shared it with our coalition members, specifically because many of our coalition members had staffers who were presenting in a session. And so there were social media posts that were like, our staffer, and then like blank space, is going to be presenting at the Delaware River Forum. Learn more and register here, and then a link to registration. So it was a way of like having social media content that bolstered their organization, because they have somebody who's presenting and they're going to be an expert in presenting on this topic. But then it also pointed people towards registration for our forum. So that was something that was a little bit new this year, and I noticed that some of our members used it, which was wonderful. And I sent it along to our coalition members along with the schedule at a glance. So I don't think at that point we had our final program yet, but we did have our schedule at a glance, which had the names of all of our presenters and what they'd be presenting on. So I included that when I sent out the social media guide so that folks could see who from their organization are presenting, are there any topics they're interested in. So that was just a way of getting more of our organizations interested in promoting this on social media. And then another thing that we did was a social media quiz contest. So the way that we essentially formatted this is, I think that maybe twice or 3 times a week, I will post a question on social media. And all of this, of course, is using our hashtag Delaware River Forum 2020 because it allows me to track people's experiences and track what people are saying about the forum. So I would post the quiz question. This was leading up, maybe a couple weeks leading up to the actual forum. I would post a quiz question, something really simple. How many states get water from the Delaware River Basin, something like that. And then the person who had the first correct response, I believe, or maybe I did, people who had, because sometimes there would be people with several kind of correct responses. And yeah, and we were able to give them free tickets. So just sent them a message on, if it was on Instagram, I think if we did this on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And when people had the correct message and they were chosen for the ticket, I just sent them a private message and gave them a comp code that we had. That again, if you're using Constant Contact, it's really easy to set up a registration page through there and create comp codes for discounted or free tickets. So that's pretty much all I had, and I think I'm going to pass it back to Olivia to talk about more things.
Awesome. Thank you, Rita. We're at the end of our presentation, actually. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I do want to echo Rita's point about like the target audience, especially like we as a staff and as a forum planning committee, like really thought about, we have a new opportunity to reach people who haven't been able to go to the forum prior, whether because they didn't know about it, like travel is too difficult for them. So we did a lot of targeted outreach to our folks up in New York because it's hard for them to come down, especially because our forums are usually like in the lower portions of the region. And that student list we spent a good amount of time doing direct outreach to. And it was because, it's cheaper to have a forum virtually than it is to have it like a hotel for a couple of days and pay for travel and this, that, and the other. So we were really able to give out comp codes like they were candy at a parade. Like if someone emailed me and they were like, I could pay, but like, it's like, it'll be hard. I could only get one staffer to come. I'm like, no, here's a comp code. You get a comp code. You get a comp code. Because what we're hoping to do is that this is then like folks who have never been able to interface with the forum before now have the experience where in coming years, they still are comfortable asking for like financial assistance if they need. And also we were getting a lot more students in the door that way. So I did see some questions in the chat, some of which I think were answered, but I'm gonna pull those up now and go through them. But if anyone else has any questions or any specific events that they're thinking about, like Sandra had said, we've got some time still together. Yeah, there was one. Yeah, so Julia, your question about like in the meeting mode, was there an ideal number of participants? It depended on if there were going to be like interactive elements, so like breakout rooms and like discussion sharing. We wanted to keep those a little bit smaller just because like we want everyone to like actually have adequate amounts of time to interact. But for the sessions where it was kind of just like normal like breakout session, you're getting a PowerPoint talked at you and then there's question and answer at the size, those we didn't cap at all. The only cap that we had was like how much we were paying Zoom, how many people they would let us in. I don't think we ever reached it. But it just depends on like, I guess the flow of the session. But I think on average, we were getting anywhere from like 35 to 60 for our like breakout sessions and then upwards of 150 to 200 for our main sessions. And it seemed to work like pretty well, no matter the number of participants in there. Zach said, did you provide any technical assistance to participants ahead of the conference? Example, how to get on Zoom. So we were kind of banking on the fact that we were in this like virtual world for a while beforehand, and the main audience of the forum is like environmental professionals. So it wasn't as much of the public that might not be using Zoom as much. But we did have like in our housekeeping notes, if anyone was having any technical issues, they could like DM the host or chat the host. And if there were things that we were asking them to do, like raise their hand or like access the chat, and folks seemed as though like they were a little unsure on how to do that, we'd be like, you can raise your hand by clicking on the participants tab. And then there's like a little hand thing. So ahead of time, I don't think we gave all that much just based on the audience, but there is like similar to how we did a presenter best practices guide for our presenters. You could very easily make something similar for attendees if you think that your audience will not be as familiar with the platform that you're using. When there is
had
no
a question.
Oh,
Before that question.
Oh yeah, Verna, go ahead. You asked, is there an easy way to capture attendance? Just like how many people were on a session?
Well, in particular, the people who were there, so we can make sure that we get it back to them. I mean.
Yeah, so in Sketch, and like if folks use Sketch and said like, I'm interested in this session, this session, and this session, on the back end, we could see like what sessions they had shown interest in. And then we had like the overall registration number. So on Zoom, you don't have a recording of like, I can't at the end of this, if there were like many of you and not everyone had their like actual name, I couldn't say like, oh, these were the people that were on. So we were kind of guesstimating based on like these are the people who had indicated their interest on Sketch. And you know, here are some people that I remember being there. If you are like very determined, I guess you could make somebody make a list of everyone's face that they see on Zoom.
Or maybe take a picture. Somebody was telling me that teachers are now trying to figure this out because they want to know when their students log in and then go out and play in the snow. And so they're trying to figure that out. But
yeah, and I think to my knowledge, Zoom doesn't have that capacity yet, but like, again, the teachers are really the driving force behind a lot of the like innovative things happening on Zoom and other platforms as well. I keep saying Zoom because that's what we used. But a lot of changes I think are going to continue happening as teachers and other people who use Zoom constantly are pushing for them.
Well, this was just an amazingly helpful list of what you did. I can't wait to listen to it again.
I was looking into this for Verna earlier this morning, and it seems as though Zoom can only download a registrant report if you use Zoom's specific registration link of sorts. So if you have like students or so on registered through Zoom, then you can download a registrant report. But other than that, and I haven't seen folks do that just yet, but I'm sure it's coming because you have these large meetings and you're like, oh wait, you know, I really wanted to email out, you know, notes or so on to every single person. Did I miss anyone? So, you know, that's probably coming soon.
Yeah.
Did Hopin allow us to record who was watching each session?
Yes. Yeah. Quick bit of background. We did our conference 2 or 3 weeks ago now. We used a platform called Hop.
A fraction the size of yours, I hasten to add, but
yeah, thank goodness.
yours is a massive effort. Ours was just 2 half days.
It was really interesting to compare Hopin and Zoom. They both have their benefits, but the Hopin reports do address what I think Verna was just asking for. At the end, you can download a spreadsheet and it'll tell you participated, true, false. So you can see of the registration list who was actually there and have those 2 numbers side by side.
Yeah. So Julia, you asked, when there's no pandemic, do you expect to continue virtually, return to person, or try to do some combination?
I only ask because, you know, we've only done 2 conferences, unlike your many. And our first was in person and the second was unexpectedly, like you, virtual. But the attendance at the virtual one hugely outstripped the in-person one.
Yeah, I think, you know, we all have the urge that we want to be in a room and like coughing on people in the future without like being scared about it. But I think there are like definitely some things that we can take away from this. Like even if there are like a handful of presentations that we record like in the actual in-person event, but like post them on to YouTube or anything like the heavy hitter, like main session keynotes things, that still I think was like really helpful. We saw like, I didn't think that a ton of people would be looking at our recorded sessions, but it has like over 100 views for all of them. So even if it's just people being like, I remember this thing, like you walk away from a conference and you're like, somebody said something and it was great. And it immediately left my brain. Like even now I'm going back to presentations to be like, what was it that that person was talking about? So that I think was really helpful. And then I think a lot of the takeaways about like the way that we did our outreach and like promotions, we saw like there is a demand for a lot of people to have those like sponsorships, student tickets, like comp things. So if we can find a way to continue like providing that, I think is something, even though we would like to go back in person eventually.
Well, believe it or not, churches, because my husband and I both are involved in our churches, and this is of interest to churches because they have actually had an uptick in attendance because people can attend who would not have been able to attend before, or weren't prepared to get up that early, or didn't want to drive, or are participating from 3 states away, you know, and they are trying to figure out ways to do this in the future to combine things.
Yeah, I think the combination route is likely the best way, at least in my humble opinion. And then Melanie, you asked, did anything change with how you handled sponsorship requirements and benefits? Yes. So it was no longer like, you can introduce this thing or like, we'll have you on a banner. So a lot of what we did was like baked into that slide deck template that we gave everyone. So if you were past like a certain level of donation, we like put you on the opening slide or the closing slide of our presentation under like a little banner that said like, thank you to our sponsors. We also like on Sketch, it had I guess like a tab or like a part of it that was like, here, a list of all the sponsors, and that we could put in as well. And then we also, I think, relied more on like social media, like these are our sponsors, thank you, like more than we would have in years past. But then some of them like carry over, like you thank them in the opening remarks, like that you can always do. And there is, the way that I found all that is I was like, virtual sponsors, question mark, question mark, question mark, send to the Google. So I'm sure like now, again, as things are happening more, there are more ideas on how to integrate sponsors virtually.
Well, this is a great presentation. Thank you very much. And the amount of thought that you put into this is really impressive.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia.
Agreed. And thank you so much for like really being open and sharing all of it.
Yeah.
You know, I know we've had a couple of conferences that PDE has hosted since, and some that we are hosting soon that have taken quite a few pages out of the book that you so graciously wrote for this. So thanks for pioneering in a lot of ways.
There's lots of good ideas.
Absolutely. And everything that Sandra has said that we will share out, we will share out. It'll likely, I'll get the recording out tomorrow again, because YouTube takes a while, especially with my internet. But we'll include all of that in a follow-up email as well. But I wanted to thank all of you for hopping on.
Thanks for having us.
Very, very worthwhile. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Nice